So, as I said, I thought I might just talk about some philosophical stuff first, and then we can go on and get into backfill into some of the details. Right now, you are in my man cave, my I love me room, or however you want to categorize it. You know, I did get to a senior rank in the Air Force and then some other stuff in civilian life. And so I'll tell you some of the things that sort of got me there. My family was reasonably poor. We grew up during the Depression. And the reason I'm saying some of this stuff, because the world looked much different then, and it's hard to sort of translate that into what it might look to you now or whatever. But so bottom line, I sort of grew up and we were very frugal. I mean, we didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. And I kind of say I sort of grew up in the school of hard knocks. I grew up during World War II mostly. I was born in 1932. We moved to Chicago. I bounced around the Midwest. I was born in St. Joseph, Missouri, on the Missouri River. Everything, my family was from the Midwest. My mother and father met at Greeley State Teachers College. He had a football scholarship. I think it really was only a 2-year college, but anyway, it was in Greeley, Colorado, and it is now Colorado Northern University, so it's a big, huge school. Anyway, they moved back to St. Joseph, Missouri, and I was there through up to 4 years old. And then my dad began to bounce around he was worked with Armour and Company. He started out slinging beef hides, flatbed. Armour Company was a very well-known meat company at that time, meat packing company. And we bounced around the Midwest and finally ended up in Chicago, Illinois. Can you hear okay?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. And that's really where I lived in Fargo, North Dakota, Minneapolis, Minnesota. I mean, several places around the Midwest. And I finally ended up 3rd grade at Chicago, Illinois. And it was on the south side of Chicago. You wouldn't want to fight your way into where I grew up, but it was a relatively small, all-white neighborhood. And I went to a relatively small, for Chicago standards, all-white high school. Actually, in any direction I went, we had to go through black neighborhoods. But actually, we got along pretty well in those days. So I went through 3rd grade and into high school and graduated from there, and then ended up in the Naval Academy. I sort of categorize 3 major things. There was a professor someplace in Colorado who wrote a book about there were sort of an 8 to 10 year period in your life, and usually about 3 factors that really condition it. So I consider those for me, growing up during the Depression, pretty frugal, cheap, you might say. But, World War II, it was sort of built-in patriotism. Everybody was basically patriotic. And on the south side of Chicago, which is a pretty tough place. And not that I had my share of fights, but you just grew up tough. And if somebody knocked you down, you better get up.
Mm-hmm. My grandfather actually grew up on the south side of Chicago too, so I've heard a lot about that. Yeah.
Okay, so I won't go on. So I first got even aware of the Naval Academy. A man who worked with my grandfather or with my father in St. Joe had graduated from the Naval Academy, but at the time, and this was in the 30s that he graduated, but they didn't need everybody. So he actually he had his commission and then didn't go in the Navy. So he would show me his sword and the pictures of the academy and all these wonderful things. So at 4 years, I started saying I wanted to go to the Naval Academy, not really know what I was talking about. But I just kept that the whole time. I took classes that would prepare me to do that. And sort of everything I did was sort of oriented towards keeping to do that. I didn't have any other good ideas when the time came, and when I graduated from high school, I was able to get an appointment, and that's one thing that's sometimes hard to do. The congressman in my district didn't have anybody who worked out a deal with one of the neighboring congressmen who was black, and he didn't feel he had anybody that was really qualified to go. So, sort of interesting side story. I was a basketball player in high school, and I entered when I was 5'6" and weighed about 135 pounds. I graduated, I was 6'2" and weighed about 180 pounds. First year I didn't make the basketball team, not surprisingly, but eventually I did. And we had a pretty decent team. But anyway, later on when I was on the varsity at the Naval Academy, a classmate of mine who was captain of the team also had been appointed by the same congressman that appointed me. And he was from Philadelphia. My classmate was from Philadelphia. So they had sort of they didn't have scholarships per se, like for athletic scholarships, but certain congressmen didn't feel they had people that well qualified, and they would give up their appointments to the athletic department. And the basketball team usually got a couple of them. So anyway, that's how that all happened. I thought that, and I'm going to make a bottom line right now, I really think I owe the Naval Academy. Whatever modicum of success I had, I think I owe it to the Academy. Athletics were appointment. I had to work pretty hard in the academic part. But fortunately, I had a mother who didn't take any prisoners and homework, and she had great expectations that, for me, and we didn't have television or any of that stuff to distract us. So it was finish dinner, go do your homework. And that was about my night of experience. As you know, if you read some of the stuff I sent you, I did end up being a major general. But I switched assignments, sort of occupations within the Air Force, every assignment. And I liked that. It gave me a broad experience. Some people don't like that. They like to get a particular thing and zero in on it. But I really believe that helped me get up the line, because I always felt I was somewhat over my head, because I'd get transferred to a job. I said, what do I do in this job? And you had to learn how to do it. And so that's what I appreciated about my experience bouncing around in the Air Force. It was always something that I felt was a challenge. And I think probably, quite frankly, I was purposely put in jobs to see how I would do. So along the way at the Academy, being a jock, I was also a varsity lacrosse player, which I had never seen in my life. But I was a pretty aggressive basketball player, and so they decided that. And if you can play lacrosse, you can play basketball. You understand lacrosse. You just have to learn how to throw that stupid ball. And at that time, the sticks were wooden, and when you got hit, it smarted. So and that's why I learned to be. I was fast to start with, and I learned how to be faster because I didn't want to get hit. So I did that. It was exciting. I ended up being a third-team All-American. We won the national championship in lacrosse, and we were in basketball. We went to the Elite Final Eight, which is pretty far up to the NCAA tournament. So athletics meant a lot to me, and I learned a lot. And among other things, it did give me a chance to get away from the Academy. There were no women at the Academy at that time. So the other motivation was go to a college and see women, talk to women. It was so. So I learned a lot from athletics, frankly. And as I said, my mother still wasn't taking any prisoners, so she expected me to get good grades and do all that stuff. I'm trying to think. Probably the most rewarding thing I did was command and combat. We got a lot of, it was the last year of the Vietnam War. I was the commander at Da Nang, which is the northernmost base. We were on a big base with the South Vietnamese, had a lot of planes there too. But and I was a fighter pilot, and I flew 97 combat missions. But they finally decided it was too dangerous to keep the fighters at Da Nang. And at that time, I was the director of operations, and the four-star in charge of the Pacific came by and said, "We're moving the fighters to Thailand because we think it's too dangerous to keep them here. And oh, by the way, you're going to stay with the command that's still here." So I got to keep flying fighters because they would come back, refuel. I could jump in, go fly a combat mission. But I still had about 100 planes, although they weren't the fighters. And I had about close to 5,000 people. So it was still pretty active, pretty challenging. They called Da Nang Rocket City for a good reason. We got rockets frequently in the middle of the night. And so it was, and you know, I really believe people at the times, you know, sort of their favorite saying was Da Nang sucks. I said, no. We're going to turn that around, folks. This is going to be the best assignment you ever had. And fortunately, I had some good people, and it was very rewarding to, as I say, command and combat, because it was like watching MASH. You ever watch MASH? Maybe, I don't know. But
No, I haven't, but I've heard about it before.
well, you know, everything was off the wall, out of the box, and you just had to keep doing what worked. And so it was fun and challenging. The most improbable job I had was again a command, but now I was assigned still in the Air Force, but to the Department of Energy. And I was running the U.S. nuclear weapon program. And nothing in my background, I couldn't hardly spell nuclear, but at any rate, I did that for almost 7 years, 5 on active duty and 2 more in the Department of Energy. So again, I still owe all those kind of things to the experience and the ability to deal with different things that I learned from the Naval Academy. So I can recommend it if for nothing else. You're going to get plenty of opportunity to do other things you might want to do in life. So once you've done your service. What else? Well, I know most of the time I thought I was being put in jobs I was kind of over my head. And again, I always said, you got the best training, just go do what you have to do. So those are maybe some of the good things I can say about the Naval Academy. And from a leadership standpoint, few things to comment about. Always take care of your people, always. Never put them in positions you wouldn't do yourself, and demonstrate that to them. I didn't send anybody into combat that I hadn't done whatever it was. I kind of believe in something some people call management by walking around. Get out of your office if you're people, you know, you say you have an open door policy, but they're intimidated. Go down into where people work and just walk in and say hi and talk to them. And you learn a lot. But I never undercut my in-between commanders. I always told them what happened. I didn't want to put anybody in a position where they felt awkward that they had talked to me. So that's another thing I would highly recommend. Get out of your office if you're in an office job or whatever you're doing. Walk around, learn from being in their spot. And again, as I said, lead by example. Let them see that you're doing stuff. Those are sort of bromides, but you got to make, there was one of the schools I went to along the line was called the Air Command Staff College. It was like an executive's semi-master program, if you will, executive leadership program. One of the movies they showed us there was 12 O'Clock High, and the whole premise was you got to live, if you're a commander, you got to live for the living. And while you may feel grief for somebody who died, you got to get on with it and take care of your troops, and don't let them feel they've been again left behind or whatever. So, what else? Well, you may have some questions along the way. So after my first tour, my first fighter squadron, I met my wife, and I went from the academy out to Arizona. There was a big air base there, but there also was a small training base about 30 miles outside of Tucson. So that's where I started out. And again, I've been cooped up for 4 years. The University of Arizona was there. I spent so much time on the campus, I got rushed by the SAA fraternity. I had to tell them, no, I've graduated from college, but that's where I met my wife. And I convinced her, I wasn't ready to get married because I wanted to get out and sort of live for a while. So I convinced her, she was a sophomore, and I convinced her she needed to get her college education. That let me stall for time before I felt that I should maybe ask her to marry me, but I wasn't ready at that time. And then she joined me finally at my first fighter squadron at Merced, California. We were there about 3 years, and then I went back to get a master's degree, something that was called the Air Force Institute of Technology, and I got my master's degree in aeronautical engineering. Again, something I had none of in undergraduate school. And again, the academy prepares you how to deal with those things. So we scram on first of all, about 25% of my class went in the Air Force, and about 25% from West Point. And that was part of the legislation that created the Air Force Academy. So that's how we all ended up in Tucson. And again, the Air Force suited me better. I love the Naval Academy, but I was going to have to go to sea for 2 years. My seamanship was not my strong suit. And so I did the Air Force or the Navy a favor, but I've stayed very close to the academy. Season tickets for 40 years for the athletic events, football. I belong to something called the Naval Academy Foundation. We raise money for Navy athletics. So I'm when Navy plays Air Force, I root for Navy. But anyway, so when I got my master's degree, they were going to send me to some assignment I didn't think made any sense. So I talked to the assignments people, and I said, "You just got me a master's degree. Don't you think you could find something that is related to it?" So they said, "Do you want to go into space, the Air Force space program?" And that applied. I mean aeronautics, the technology was. So I went to Los Angeles for 4 years. Well, now my wife is back where she came from, Los Angeles. She said, "I joined the Air Force to see the world. I've been in Merced, California, and now I'm back in Los Angeles." I said, "We'll get to the rest of it sooner or later." But again, that was and I was only a young captain, but I had a master's degree. Most of the senior people had come back from World War II, and they didn't have advanced education. So I was sort of like a piece of gold and was given things to do I wouldn't have otherwise been done later in life as a young captain. So that was another broadening experience. And there I got assigned. The Air Force had a system where if they thought you were up and coming, they had what they called below the zone promotions. So I was being promoted ahead of all my naval classmates, usually 2 or 3 years ahead. So I had spent 4 years in Los Angeles, and I got promoted to major and sent to what was called, that's where I went to the Air Command and Staff College. And again, it was mixed in with people from foreign countries. And, it was, again, another mind-broadening experience. And from there, it was time, you needed to do unaccompanied assignments just sort of to pull your weight. And so I was given the opportunity to go to Iceland and go back into a fighter squadron, where I now was a senior enough to be the operations officer. And I decided not to take my family because I wasn't sure about being in Iceland. I'd had to go for 2 years. So I said, I needed to get an unaccompanied assignment. Anyway, I'll go for a year. And that was also kind of a very fascinating place to go be assigned. My wife went back to Los Angeles at that time. That was a very interesting year. And I said, if I'm going to be up here, a lot of people go up there and pull the world in over their heads. They don't want to, you know. I said, I'm going to learn everything about Iceland I can. We had a pretty good basketball team on the base. We played the Icelandic Olympic team 5 times. We beat them twice. They beat us 3 times. But I just went out and got to know Iceland. And the mission was pretty exciting for peacetime. We intercepted the Russian bombers about 400 miles out over the Norwegian Sea. There was no air sea rescue. We were single engine, single seat. So for a peacetime mission, it was, we take pictures of them taking pictures of us. What it boiled down to, you know, we were way out. And we were on again. I was, in air defense, which is my first fighters I flew, you sit 5 minutes alert and you have to be airborne within 5 minutes. So that means I learned very quickly to sleep like a dog. I'm up. I mean, when the bell goes off, I'm awake and going. And that carried over and it was helpful. So but up in Iceland, we had, it was a little easier because the Russians, we knew when they were coming longer than we knew in the States. And so we sat 10-minute alerts. So that was a little easier, but we wore these, what they call poopy suits, which meant if you had to bail out, it might help you live a little bit longer, but not much. But anyway, so fortunately we had time to put those damn things on and then scramble off into the world. Again, a very interesting thing. I got assigned from there to the Pentagon again. You know, I couldn't spell Pentagon. Why am I going there? But again, they looked me up. And I was put in a job where our mission was to condition the Air Force for reason to change. That meant we were sort of advanced planners and we had license to change things and not get killed by somebody. And so that was fun and exciting. And again, it was expanding. By the time I got to that job, I had made lieutenant colonel, again below the zone. And by the time, so all my friends were going to Vietnam, and I said, I got to go to Vietnam. And so I finally was able to wrangle us. And I worked for a very, very, very smart non-pilot major general in the Air Force. And so he finally said, yeah, you got to do that. So we worked it out. And I was on my way to Vietnam. And suddenly I'm out going through survival training and all the things you have to do. And I get a call from this general saying, I hope you haven't sold your house because you just made colonel and we're pulling you back to the Pentagon because they don't have a job for you in Vietnam. So I did that. And he said, oh, and then you're going to go to the National War College after you've been back here for a year. So then I went to the National War College. So when I got through that, I said, guys, you remember Vietnam and me? You think we could work that out? And that's how I got assigned to Da Nang. And I went originally. And again, I had to go up because I was now in airplanes that threw at the ground and dropped bombs and chase other fighters around. So I was in a whole different world of flying as well. And I went and spent 6 months learning how to do that kind of flying and then went to Vietnam. So I was there a year, the war ended. And I, again, thought I had to do something different. I hadn't been to Europe. So again, I had a good friend, classmate, who was in NATO at the military headquarters. And he was a colonel, but he was working for a 4-star. I said, do you think you could say anything? And maybe I could get, when I leave here, maybe I could get assigned. Next thing I know, I was assigned to Belgium and picked up my family and we moved to Belgium. And that was a fascinating assignment, again, because we had some chance to see Europe. And again, we were with, at that time, 15 NATO nations. And it was interesting to get to learn how a German reacts or how Frenchman reacts. Or, you know, there were 50. So that was, again, a very interesting assignment. And I was there about 3 years and suddenly got promoted to 1-star general. And so they don't treat generals very well. But usually you get a call saying, why weren't you here yesterday? And you didn't know you'd been assigned. And so I got a call during Christmas week, and from the Pentagon saying, the new Secretary of the Air Force wants to interview you, and he wants you here Friday for the interview and a higher plan to stay. Well, this was Tuesday, and Belgium's sort of a third world country in some respect. So I just had a hell of a time getting a flight back to the United States on time. So I went in, I didn't know this guy, and except he knew me from some other people. And so he said, I interviewed him and with him, and he said, well, you go talk to your buddies in the Pentagon, and if you want the job, be here at 4 o'clock. Well, sure, I'm going to tell him I don't want the job. So that wasn't going to happen. So I went down at 4 o'clock. He said, be there for my swearing in, and we swore him in. And he said, I know you need to go back and pick up your family, but you can do that in 3 weeks. And because I want to have my whole new staff with me immediately, and we're going to go do things. So that was a totally different assignment. And that guy was a very, very smart, he was a nuclear physicist. And he had run Reagan's campaign in California when he was elected to government. So he was Mr. Inside, one of the Mr. Inside people in the Republican Party. And during my tour, I learned a lot about inside politics, which again, is another total experience. And then when the Democrats won the next election, I was figuring I was going to get assigned to do something else, and the new Secretary of the Air Force came in. Now he's a Democrat, but he was also grew up in Chicago. He was a Chicago guy, so we bonded right away. And I'm thinking, well, see you, sir. Where do you want me to go? And he said, I want you to stay. So I spent a total of 3 years in the Secretary's office. I think he really, in his heart, was a Republican, but that was all right. So again, it was a total different experience. He was sort of he'd been CEO of a couple big companies. And so again, a total different experience, again, which I liked. When finally I said, boss, I got to go do something else. So he said, okay. And I went to a big Air Force training center out in Denver, where I had 14,000 people under me. And we trained in 5 or 6 different disciplines for the Air Force. Some enlisted, some officer. And that was a whole different world. So anyway, the point I'm trying to make is I keep bouncing along. And then in the dark of night, I've been there about 2 years, and I got a call saying, we want you to go to the Department of Energy and be in charge of the nuclear weapons program. Now, after World War II, they didn't want to put all the responsibility for nuclear weapons in one agency. So they put the production, research, development, testing, and then what they created the Atomic Energy Commission. That morphed eventually and ended up being part of the Department of Energy. And I sort of said, why me? I said, well, when you were back in the space program, you had a program that developed nuclear reactors for space. I said, that's turning the power on. Now you want me to go blow the world up. But anyway, so I saluted. And that turned out to be another fascinating assignment. And about that time, we were really in a Cold War with the Russians. Reagan wanted to put a lot of pressure on the Russians in terms of keeping up with what we were doing. And so I basically had to start up the whole nuclear weapons program because again, in terms of the production facilities, they'd all atrophied, the testing sites, and we started producing quite a few weapons, but it was a part of sort of putting a lot of pressure on them. And so I went to the chief of staff of the Air Force, who I had known and knew he had also been a nuclear physicist. So people wonder, who's this guy making an appointment with the Secretary of the Air Force, a two-star? But I knew him very well. And I said, you got any marching orders for me? And he said, just deliver the weapons on time and don't let the nuclear laboratories build Taj Mahals. I could understand that. So when I went over there, they didn't know how to take me because when I said, we're going to meet our production. They used to play games. They try to do things that they could blame if the weapons weren't being delivered on time on the Department of Energy, and then vice versa. And I said, no, we're going to deliver the weapons, period. If I have to take the money out of the laboratories. And that happened. And we did. And anyway, so I kept doing things that were kind of out of the box. And I enjoyed it all the way along. Finally, I'd been in the Air Force 30 years. And at that time, the promotion was sort of based on being able to stay in was based on getting promoted. Well, now I'm out of sight, out of mind. All my sponsors had left the Air Force. And so I basically had to retire. And the Department of Energy said, well, we'd like you to stay here and become an assistant secretary. And again, Reagan was the president. And you pick up not only the weapons part of it, I picked up the reactor part of it, which they were always having problems. I mean, something's leaking. So again, a whole new experience. And after a couple of years, a new Secretary of the Energy came in. He wanted to bring in somebody that he knew, and I was ready to go do something else. I wanted to get out of national security. So again, the secretary that I worked for from Chicago really wanted me to come to Chicago, but he put me in touch with a headhunter. I went out and interviewed, and the headhunter guy said, well, there's this job I think you might like. And he said, the secretary's not going to be happy with me that I didn't get you to Chicago, but it had to do with the airline industry. And that was fine. Totally out of national security. I went to work for what was called the Air Transport Association, which had all the major airlines. It was a big association, about 180 people. And I was brought in to be executive vice president of sort of all the technically related stuff. Like we interacted with the government. I always said we're like a black box. The government talks like this, the airlines talk like this, and we allow them to talk. And that was a fun job too, because I could fly all over the world, take my wife on pass, and I really enjoyed it. I stayed there about 7 years and retired and that. But I was doing still then I stayed on and did a lot of work for the National Academy of Science because they knew who I was and they'd asked me to do studies, beyond studies. And eventually I chaired a big board for them. And this time it totally involved me with agencies like NASA, again, sometimes the Air Force, but doing technical studies. And the National Academies have a great reputation because they know, people know they're not a beltway bandit. They're not going to do something that whoever hired them wants and the answer they want. They knew they were going to get a straight, here's what's what. Again, another fun, I wasn't getting paid except to go travel around the world even, doing things for people. So again, that's sort of my background. So my point is the Naval Academy sort of helped me do that all the way along. Always felt I was over my head, always challenged, but I didn't back down. So that's it, I guess. Now, if you have some questions, I looked at all the questions you gave me, so I tried to answer all of them in my own way. But if you want more on something, just fire away.
All right, thank you so much. That was amazing. Real quick, I want to just do like a for the record thing. So, could you say when and where you were born?
I was born in St. Joseph, Missouri, just like Huckleberry Finn on the Missouri River. And I stayed there until I was 4 years old. And then I didn't go back. My family never went back for years and years and years, even though my father had been born there also. We were both only children, so we didn't have many, we didn't have a whole lot of relatives. And not too long ago, about 5 or 6 years ago, one of my bucket list things was to go to St. Joseph, Missouri. And I've never been there. And I'd come out of Kansas. I had work in Kansas City, and I'd come out of the Kansas City airport, and it was about 25 miles to Kansas City and about 50 miles to St. Joe. And I said, I got to go there. So I did. And that was kind of fun and weird. And I found where I lived. So it didn't look quite the same, obviously, because when I was there at 4 years old, the river looked huge. Now I'm back there, and I went to lunch on the river, and I said, this river doesn't look that big. So I went back to the hotel, and I said to him, am I only on an estuary or something? Is that the whole river? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, maybe I ought to go across the bridge. Missouri's on one side of the river, Kansas is on the other, and see what it looks like from there. And he looks at me and he said, why would anybody want to go to Kansas? So, well, so I did. And on the way back, I found a National Guard base driving back. It turns out there was a little wedge in Kansas that was still counted as Missouri, and it was the Missouri Air National Guard. So I went, I had my military ID, and I went on, and I finally, and all the buildings are National Guard, so they're locked and whatever. And I finally saw something that said Operations Building. And so I knocked on the door, or the last door, and a young Air Force captain, National Guard captain, came up and said, can I help you, sir? And I said, well, I was born across the river in St. Joe, Missouri, and I'm just a little old retired Major General, and I just wanted to come over here and see what was going on. She goes, Major General? She said, you got to see the operations officer. I said, no, he's got work to do. I don't want to bother him. No. She got a senior master sergeant woman, grabbed me by the ears and dragged me in to see this guy. And then you got to meet the commander. Like, no, you guys got work to do. So now they dragged me in there. So that was kind of my only and ever visit back to St. Joe. From there, as I said, we bounced around other places in the Midwest, Fargo, North Dakota, Minneapolis, and ended up in Chicago. And that, as I said, eventually got me into high school level. So, okay, shoot again.
All right. And what year were you born?
1932.
1932. Wow.
I know. Good vintage.
Oh, yeah. And you were a Major General in the Air Force, correct?
Yes.
Right. And
even though I graduated from the Naval Academy.
yeah, it's really interesting. I didn't know that they took people from the Naval Academy for the Air Force.
Well, as I said, the Air Force was part of the Army. It was the Army Air Corps.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1947, they decided, after the experiences of World War II, they wanted a separate Air Force. And at the time, they made it so that 25% of the Naval Academy and 25% of West Point could go in the Air Force to build up their regular officer corps. And the Navy never thought the 25% would do that. We did. And the reason I really did that, I wanted to go fly. And the Navy wanted me to go to sea for 2 years, which I can understand from their point. But I said, nah, why don't I just go in the Air Force right off? And I never regretted it.
And so I talked to someone else who went to West Point 20-ish years ago, and he said that the way that they ran it was completely different than they ran it now. Like they didn't have any majors. It was really just like a set curriculum for West Point. Was the Naval Academy like that back then?
Yes, absolutely. It was generally reviewed as an engineering degree, but it was just called a Bachelor of Science. Most people sort of counted it more as an electrical engineering degree. We had one option, one thing we could take other than the set course, and again, a lot of engineering courses, was what language we were going to take. We all had to take the foreign language, and they had 6 languages you could choose from. And so I chose French. I took Latin in high school and decided it was supposed to be a good foundation for other languages, I didn't think so. So so I took French, and then you were put in your assignments within the academy. There were 24 companies at that time. I think there's 36 now. I'm not sure. But anyway, there was 24 companies, and we went to class by company, by language. And so everybody in my class, let's say freshman and junior, we all marched to school, marched to all our classes, no women at that time. And my roommates we were all in French. So we all did that one course. And there was Spanish and German and Russian. And anyway, there were 6 languages we could choose from. We did that for 2 years. And then we were through our language by then. But again, all our courses were basically engineering kind of courses. Oh, we got English and all the other stuff. But anyway, that's what I did. And
It's
my first
interesting.
roommate actually in the Air Force was a West Point guy. He'd come in, same thing. We got married up in flight training, and we just sort of stuck together. And we both went to the same first fighter squad, and we all went through our fighter upgrade in air defense. And we just stayed as bachelors until I broke off and got married. And years later, he finally got married. But we stayed very close with a West Pointer.
That's awesome. And then do you remember your service dates?
What?
Your service dates? So the dates that you served.
It was June 4th, 1954 till basically June 8th or whatever it was, 1984. So 30 years.
Wow, that's amazing.
And then that's when I went with the Department of Energy, which I stayed for another 2. So I was still in government. And actually I was a little higher rank as an assistant secretary in terms of the whole scheme of things.
Right. And then what conflicts did you serve in?
Oh, Vietnam. As I said, it was probably the most rewarding assignment I ever had because I had a lot of people to look out for. And I'd never even been, as I said, I was in air defense. Those are squadron level. Air defense is basically you're a squadron at a base. And when I went into the tactical fighter kind of stuff, I had to get upgraded to the F4 and learn how to drop bombs and do other things. I've never been in a wing, a tactical wing. We had 4 squadrons eventually when they kept building up the war. So I was the operations officer. Then, as I said, they pulled the fighter squadrons out because they got too dangerous. And then I had about 100 airplanes and about 5,000 guys still working for me. And it was, as I said, it was kind of bizarre assignment, but rocket attacks and the whole 9 yards. But it was rewarding in the sense that I had people's lives to worry about. Just try to do things out of the box to get things done. So that was my flying combat experience. And it was a little exciting. My first mission north, I was still learning. I had not been north before. When I got there, we were still flying in country in Vietnam itself. And then we went north again. So I'd never been north. So my first flight north, I was in a 4-ship. You follow up, went places in 4-ship formations. And so I was on the wing of one of the squadron commanders. And but when you can't fight with 4 airplanes, it's too complex, too difficult. So when you actually start fighting, you split into formations of 2 airplanes. And my job as a wingman was to keep anybody off my leader so that he can do the fighting part of it and I can keep him from getting shot down. And so I had a leader who was kind of, I think he was trying to kill me most of the time. But anyway, we went through a cloud. Oh, we'd gotten briefed walking out to the airplane on a new tactic they were using. And what it was they would flash a MiG-21, which is their best kind of fighter, and they would flash it down in front, which they did, down in front of us, pull this guy straight up. Well, my leader, Fangs went down, and he wanted to get a good kill, so he goes charging up. We've been briefed, when they do that, they're going to have two MiGs sitting way up high. And when you go after that MiG, they have all this speed, energy, and they're coming right down on their tail. And that's what happened. And I looked right away. I looked up and I said, uh-oh. And so pretty soon this guy's on my tail. I could see him in the cockpit. But I had preached flight discipline. I'm not going to I'm going to stay and protect my leader. But it's getting a little scary out. I have two MiGs on my tail, and my back seat is going crazy. Well, now I'm in a two-seat fighter, but my back seat is going crazy. And I had a plan if I saw any sparkle come off this guy's wing. I called my leader and I said, John, just like we got briefed, this guy's about to hammer me. You got a plan? He was trying to shoot this guy down. But anyway, finally, they couldn't stay with us. Once we fought like this at force. The MiGs fought like this. So they were trying to get us, they were more maneuverable in that room, and we had more energy in this. He just finally couldn't stay with me. And so I saw 7 MiGs during that flight. And it was a very interesting way to get my first real combat. I've flown other missions where I was dropping bombs on people and other nice things, but never was I in combat with other MiGs. So that was my first experience at that. So anyway, it was a pretty exciting year, actually.
Oh wow. What was your most like impactful conflict story or like combat experience?
Well, they were all kind of different in a way. That one I just told you was probably the most, white knuckle one. But we had another mission where we had a lot of anti-aircraft being fired at us, and they changed our mission in midstream, and we really hadn't been briefed where on. And when we were trying to put bombs on some places, and all of a sudden we were getting all this anti-aircraft flashing around our cockpit, and that was a little exciting. So most missions had a little excitement to them. There weren't really any patty cake things. So, but that's basically was it. Dropping bombs on people that are shooting back at you and getting them mixed up with MiGs and stuff.
Oh wow, that's incredible. So did you serve in just Vietnam or Korea in the Cold War too?
No, when I graduated from the academy, Korea had just started off. By the time I got through flight training, Korea, classes before me did go to Korea, but it was basically, we were pulling back out of Korea by the time I was assigned my first fighter squadron. And so, no, I didn't, that's the only combat I had was in Vietnam.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And were there any like major people that you met who influenced your career?
Well, both these secretaries of the Air Force did, and several of the 4-stars. I even had the opportunity to brief Reagan a couple times. I got to know the Vice President, George Herbert Walker, was the Reagan's first Vice President. And later on, when I was in the airline industry, there was a meeting in the White House, and he was the president. George H.W. Bush by then was the president, and it had to do with airline stuff. And so I was there, and after the meeting itself was over, he came up to me and he said, "Bill, you want to see my office?" "Sure, Mr. President. What else have I got to do?" So he took me in his office and showed me around. So that was kind of fun. So I had opportunities to, be at highest levels of government and learn things. Everything. You never believe you know actually what's going on in Washington. Seriously. there's always stuff under the covers that you don't. So I never believe anything too seriously that I hear. But I was, I testified before Congress quite a few times, and that's another experience. It's sort of like theater, and as long as you all play your own part, everything's sort of all right. But sometimes that doesn't work out all that well. And of course, I was briefing them a lot on nuclear stuff, and these guys didn't know very much about nuclear stuff. And so their staffers would write them questions to ask. And so they would ask, and they really didn't know what they were asking in a sense. And this one congressman, the staffers gave him 3 different ways to ask the question, same question, but 3 different ways. So he'd have a choice on how he wanted to ask it. Well, he didn't know they were different. He thought he thought they were all different questions. And now I'm trying to not embarrass him, and I give him the same answer to three different. The bottom line answer to 3 different. So that was you go through all kinds of little funny things along the way. So that was interesting.
Wow, that's amazing.
But again, I all went to the Naval Academy that I had enough broad-based experience to deal with all that. And incidentally, I'm not knocking going to the Air Force Academy or West Point. I'd have to, but anyway, the Air Force Academy is very worthwhile.
Definitely. I'm applying to all 4, so Coast Guard included.
That's good. Yeah, I had applied out of high school. I applied to NROTC, which I got accepted to. I applied to the Coast Guard Academy, which I got accepted to. And I applied to the Naval Academy, and that's the last one I heard from. So I'm telling these other people, I can't commit yet. And that didn't make the Coast Guard Academy people very happy at all. But I was holding out to go to the Naval Academy, and finally it came through.
So how come you decided to do the Naval Academy over any of your other options?
Well, as I told you, this good friend of my father, we were family friends. And as I said, he got me interested in the Naval Academy, and I sort of just stuck with that thought. And I never even, well, of course, that time, the Air Force didn't exist. And I was writing, I'd always listen. Of course, we didn't have, TVs or anything else in that time, but I'd always listen to the Army-Navy game on the radio. And somehow I always just got pumped up the fighting Navy spirit and all this stuff. And so I just kept plugged in. I wanted to go to the Naval Academy. Plan B, I had been accepted to go to UCLA in the NROTC program, which was probably what I would have done.
And then why did you decide to stay in the military for so long?
Well, a couple of times I had semi-serious thoughts about getting out. But every time I sort of, you have to commit for a certain number of years when they promote you. And so that kept, every time I thought maybe about getting out, they'd promote me, and I'd say, well, I might as well. So, that just kept bumping along. And finally I just decided, well, I'm certainly going to stay the 20, and I might as well stay as long as they'll keep me. So I did.
Oh,
But
wow.
I really enjoyed it. I like going someplace else. My kids didn't.
Yeah.
We don't want to be jerked around and go. And I'd say, well, you like Denver? Yeah. I said, well, you wouldn't have been in Denver if I hadn't been in the airport. You love Belgium. Oh, yeah, that was great. Well, you wouldn't have been to Belgium if you didn't, I hadn't been in the Air Force. And, so they said they didn't like it, but they liked every place they'd been, as it turned out. My daughter and her husband, when they got married, they said they both wanted to settle down in one place, period. So they live in the Washington, D.C. area.
Oh, that's funny. So do you think or I'm trying to formulate this question. Did you notice like a big change between when you first joined the Air Force and then through your time in the Air Force?
Not really. I mean, technology was still fairly compatible. I mean, now today, I mean, it's so different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not a whiz on, a lot of stuff and cyber, the whole 9 yards. I try to sort of stay familiar with it, but I don't have enough technical talent. But during my time, I could, even though I could had a hard time spelling nuclear, I finally learned how nuclear weapons worked and all that stuff.
Were you in when they started like bringing women into the military?
Yeah, at that time, I was in that big training center and I told you about, and it was in Denver, and which isn't too far from the Air Force Academy. So I had a lot of interaction with the Air Force Academy then, just on the side. But yeah, and I sort of said, look, folks, I have facilities that are not suitable across the board to take care of the women. If you're going to bring women in, let's do it right. And it, made some people unhappy, but whatever. I said, if we're going to have people, ladies who want to work out, they got to have places that, shower and change clothes and do all these wonderful things. So yeah, I was sort of, because I was in the training aspects that by then, yeah, I was fairly involved with them.
All right. And one last one is like what impact do you think your military experience had on your job after you left the military?
Well, it wasn't, well, first of all, for instance, I was a pilot. The airline industry has pilots. And, so I had that kind of experience in my dealings with, the airline industry in itself. And I understood things about maintenance. And so I understood a lot of the aspects of the airline industry. I didn't know not so much about the business side of it, but I would say there was quite a direct relationship to what I had done along the way. And that was useful. And I was used. I did a lot of stuff with the National Aeronautics and Space because of my background in space. I got involved with them quite a bit. So I'd say there was a lot of correlation in terms of my carryover from the Air Force to what I did in civilian life.
And what got you interested in flying?
To tell you the truth, I told you I was a jock. I played basketball, varsity lacrosse. I sort of got to the point where, well, what am I going to do for excitement when I graduate from the Naval Academy? I said, well, flying, white scarf in the breeze, that sounds exciting. I'll do that. And there wasn't much more to it than that. And so
wow.
I said, I'm going to go on. And the way the Naval Academy gave you the opportunity to make that choice, we did it by lottery, strictly by lottery. So it was strictly luck in some respects that I got to go in aviation. Now the Army did it West Point did it by your class standing.
Mm-hmm.
And they found out that a lot of top graduates were going in the Air Force instead of the Army, so they changed their way of doing it. But I literally went up and took my name out of a hat, and I had a high enough, priority number that I could have done basically any assignment, any kind of assignment I wanted. And the assignments, if you went, you could pick what. The Navy has submarine service,
Mm-hmm.
they have naval aviation, and they got Navy surface. And among themselves, they don't necessarily all get along together. And but I would have gone Navy Air had I gone in the Navy for that was my goal. As I said, seamanship was not my strong suit. I didn't like. I never got seasick, but I didn't like my first. Oh, and each summer at the academy, they sort of done it a little different now. We went on about a 6-week cruise, and my first, they call it plebe cruise, but technically you finish plebe year. And we went on. It was probably one of the worst Atlantic storms they'd ever had, and I was assigned to a battleship, and the Wisconsin, and you go on basically your first. Now I'm a sophomore in theory, but they call it plebe cruise. And I was assigned to the engineering department. I was down in where the engines and the boiler rooms and all, you're underwater the whole time, which was fortunate because this storm was really rough. I didn't get seasick, but most everybody did. But so you go through the different departments as you would if you were an enlisted man on that first cruise. So I went through being down in the engine rooms and all that stuff, and I bumped up, I got on the surface, the deck crew kind of thing, where you're holy stony. And you just bounce through different parts of being on a ship, but as if you were an enlisted man. Then the next cruise, they call the aviation cruise, and I was assigned to an aircraft carrier called the Midway. And you go on about a 3 or 4 week actual out in the ocean kind of cruise where they're operating aircraft and you're going in different ports. And we went up to Canada and went to their Naval Academy equivalent. And then senior year, you go basically on board as an officer, junior officer. And again, you go through the different. We had to navigate down to Rio. We went to Rio. And you usually make about 3 port calls on these cruises. So you get to go visit a port. And usually you're in port for 4 days or whatever it is. Well, first thing I was in navigation. And I had the training in navigation and all, but somehow I had to find Brazil, Rio de Janeiro. On my first class cruise. And so they bounce you. I know they do it a little differently now. They break you into smaller groups. We were, quite a few people all on the same ship, and we were on different ships. I mean, normally we were like a World War II task force operation. Like in my first cruise, I think we had 2 battleships, a carrier, several destroyers, a couple cruisers, and we were out flopping around learning how to not run into each other and all that stuff. That's good. But anyway, yeah, I gave it full chance, but I finally decided I'd rather be in aviation. One, you got paid more.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was an incentive. You made $150 more a month if you would.
Wow.
Because for good reason. It's hazardous duty, and statistically, more people are going to have a chance to get killed. So that's why. But anyway, I just sort of bounced into those things. But I got a good exposure to the Navy. I mean, I did something every summer out in the middle of the ocean. And one year the really bad storm, we finally went up the 4th of 1st to Edinburgh. I was never so happy to see green, not sea green, but grass green, because we've been out there in the middle of the ocean for about 2.5 weeks. And it was just a pleasure to see land again. And our first class cruise, we went to Lisbon, Portugal, and a couple other places. So that's how they put us through our training. And again, we did, we had basically 8 weeks summer leave, or 8 weeks not at the, and 6 of it was on cruises, or in the case of Navy aviation, you went to Navy air bases and learned about Navy stuff. And I went to industry, went to aviation production companies and learned that part of the world. So,
oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, they do it a little differently now. They break you into smaller groups and send you all over the world.
Yeah. I think junior year you decide like to go with submarine, surface warfare, or aviation too.
I never did anything on a submarine,
Yeah.
which did not make me unhappy one little bit. The only submarine I really ever was on when a classmate invited me to go have breakfast with him in San Francisco Bay when we were and my air base was in the middle of California, and so we were both had gone to the Navy Cal football game, and then he invited me to come over for breakfast. That's my only time on a submarine, which is fine with me. But one of my roommates who lives here in Williamsburg, in a retirement home, he went Navy subs, and the other one went Navy surface. So we started out with two roommates, and then after 2 years, it went down to just two to a room. So the other one split off and went with somebody else.
Hmm. Oh wow.
And we stayed in the same company the whole 4 years. They may do other things now. And
I
said,
think I think they change you out every year now.
I think they did. The other thing, they really got too cliquey during this COVID thing. Too many little pockets of complaint sort of feasted on themselves. But yeah, we stayed in the same company for 4 years.
Wow. So you got to know your company mates really well.
Yeah, no, we're very, it's like a fraternity, frankly.
Oh wow.
We just had our 65th reunion 3 years ago. And I don't know how we're going to do a 70th. I mean, we're beginning to get few and far between. And going up to Annapolis, even from here, is getting to be hard to do. So I finally canceled my season football tickets this year.
Oh really?
One, my wife doesn't want to go anymore anyway, so it's a long drive.
Oh yeah.
But usually I go up on Friday, stay overnight in the lodge, and go to the game, and then come back Sunday. It took sort of like 2.5 days to go to football games.
That's really cool though. That's all the questions I had. If you want to add anything on, that would be great.
Well, I don't think so. I just thoroughly enjoyed though every assignment. I mean, I must admit, I was fortunate. Some people get assignments they don't like. Some people are out in the middle of nowhere. So to some degree, I was fortunate. But on the other hand, I sort of made my own fortune in a sense because I did well enough. They decided to put me someplace that was a meaningful job. So you can make your own bed, I guess, depending. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. I would do it over again.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for talking to me, and thank you for your service.
Oh, sure. And if you think of anything else, just send me an email and I'll answer whatever if it's not too self-incriminating.
Absolutely.